Welcome to the Law School Admissions Simplified podcast, where we talk about all things LSAT, law school admissions, and otherwise. I'm Ben, and I do LSAT prep full time. Today, we're just going through an interview with Chloe. She is a 1L at Gonzaga, which is up in Washington. In that interview, we just talk about, what Gonzaga's like. It's mostly focused on her actual law school experience, some of which is probably applicable to all law schools, others of which might be pretty tied in to Gonzaga. Just for reference, because we don't go into it too deeply, but she is okay with me sharing. She had a low 160 something. I'm not totally sure. I think she had a pretty good GPA. I want to say like a 3.8, 3.9. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it was definitely above like a 3.6. And she applied like we talked about in December. With her, I did essays and whatnot, and she also did my LSAT class in like 1 hour of tutoring over the course of what was it? Maybe May of 2022 to like August. With that, so that's that. I think it's a pretty good interview. Thank you again to Chloe for coming on, and thank you for watching. Alrighty, so this is Chloe. Yeah, Chloe, could you quickly introduce yourself, where you go to law school, all that good fun stuff?
Sure. Like Ben said, my name is Chloe. I'm a 1L at Gonzaga University School of Law. It is in Spokane, Washington. So I just completed my first semester, waiting for grades, beginning of January. Yeah, so that's where I'm at right now.
Cool. And Gonzaga, that's a fun school up in Washington. Was it a close decision, or were you looking at other schools back in the application process?
Uh, the biggest thing for me is I kind of wanted to stay closer to home and my family. I'm originally from Oregon, and then I did my undergrad in Lewiston, Idaho, at Lewis Clark State College. And one thing about me, I rely on my family a lot for support, and so I didn't want to leave them and go very far away. So I was looking mostly at schools kind of in the Pacific Northwest. So Gonzaga, University of Idaho, Willamette down in Salem, Oregon, University of Oregon. I applied to one in Minnesota. I have family back there. So I was like, kind of, why not? Um, oh, and then I applied to a couple down in Texas as well. I had family living down there at that point. I wasn't really 100% sure about going down there, but I kind of was like, well, why not just apply and keep my options open?
Yeah, it's always good to have a wide net and then make the decision in hindsight. Um, so in Spokane, I'm not super familiar with Pacific Northwest geography. You're from Oregon. Is it like what, a few hour drive, or how far are you away from your family?
So I'm about 5.5 hours from like my home where I grew up. And then I'm only about 2 hours from Lewiston, which is where I did my undergrad. Um, and so I'm not very far away at all. And I do have a lot of, good connections for my undergrad in Lewiston. My boyfriend's family lives in Lewiston. And so it's nice being only like a couple hours away from somewhere I feel comfortable. And if I ever needed anything, I could just go down there. And then 5.5 hours really isn't that bad either. Like you can do it in a day drive.
Right.
So yeah, that was important to me. I kind of wanted to stay maybe under 10 hours, I feel like, away from home.
Yeah, well, that feels like a good distance because you're separate enough to like focus in and lock in on school without your family like calling you up for favors, but also you're not so far to where it's a real headache to like get home for holidays and stuff. So
Yeah.
that's and yeah, I guess were there any, well, I'm trying to think about the geography of the other schools. I guess what was
So
Spokane the closest to kind of where you were looking, or were there any closer schools? Or sorry.
Um, so there's University of Idaho, which is in Moscow, Idaho. And the cool thing about University of Idaho is they're the only law school in Idaho, like the whole state of Idaho. And so that's pretty cool. They have like since they're the only law school, a lot of those U of I graduates, they kind of just get jobs because that's the
Right.
only law school in Idaho. So I did think about that, but part of me kind of wanted to get a little bit farther away from where I was going to undergrad. Moscow was only like 30 minutes away from where I did my undergrad. And so I kind of just personally wanted to expand my horizons a little bit.
Sure.
Um, and so Spokane, it's just also a really fun town. And I think it's a really fun place for young people to be in. And so that's kind of like what made me want to explore like Gonzaga a little bit more. As for the Oregon schools like Willamette, which is in Salem, and then University of Oregon, which is in Eugene, those were probably like 7-ish hours away from where I grew up, and so not bad either.
Right.
I went down and I visited most schools that I like applied to and I got accepted. I only got waitlisted at one. I got waitlisted at University of Oregon, and that was kind of odd. I didn't hear back from them until like April, and at that point I had already decided where I was going to go to school. And so I just told them you can pull my application. I didn't want to write something for them to like reconsider me. And so I feel like distance wise, other than like the Texas and Minnesota schools that I applied to, they were all pretty like like comparative on where I kind of grew up. And so out of all those ones that I applied to, I felt like the distance was going to be okay. And so that wasn't really a huge factor because I just had kind of applied to the ones that I knew I kind of wanted to go to.
Sure. Yeah. I was just looking at the Oregon stats real quick. It's odd that you got waitlisted knowing your stats. Like I would not, I
Yeah.
didn't, I don't know that I ever heard that, which I don't know. Admissions can be random. Occasionally you like come across someone's desk and their ex-wife was named Chloe and they just have that like sour taste in their mouth before they even read your application. So it's
Yeah.
definitely good to cast a wide net.
It was odd. Side note, I have a really good friend here at Gonzaga who she applied to U of O too, and she had actually like lower stats than me. And they waitlisted her, and then she wrote something like, I still want to be considered. And so they reconsidered her, and then she ended up getting accepted. But she had someone tell her, and who knows, how accurate it is, but that they just like needed more applicants. They had like denied too many at first, and then we're like,
Okay.
oh, we need more.
Well,
So who knows?
yeah, the past 2 years have been really weird, and the patterns haven't held constant over the years. So the law schools they're used to receiving a constant number of applications, so they kind of have a system. But that system has broken down because the incoming numbers are different, and they've had to adapt. And some schools have done it better than others. Additionally, some schools use the waitlist as a negotiation standpoint. Georgetown, back in like the 2010s, used to waitlist literally every applicant just so that they could get more people to pay full price, kind of like a
Wow.
I'm better than you situation. Even if you were a 184.0 with the perfect essays, they would still waitlist you just to put themselves in a power position. I don't know if that's what Oregon is doing, but just looking at your stats, and like I know your application, you had, I think like good stuff. Like I don't think you had any red flags in your application. It's odd that they would well, you should be kind of a slam dunk admit at Oregon without much thought to it. At minimum, they should be willing to take your tuition and charge you, which, yeah. So when making the decision, was the scholarship slash financial aspect a decent chunk of your driving force?
Yeah, Gonzaga definitely gave me the best scholarship, which was very nice because Gonzaga, without the scholarship, would be like the most expensive school I applied to. But from talking to my other classmates, they gave a lot of people really great scholarships, and so that's really good. Um, I did get pretty good scholarships at other schools. A lot of them I qualified for like the in-state tuition, and so that was a big help too. Um, like University of Idaho, if you have certain like LSAT and GPA, you'll automatically qualify for the in-state tuition, even if you're not an Idaho resident. And so it was a big factor. But I also kind of kept in mind that if there was a school that I really wanted to go to, even if they maybe didn't give me as much money as a different school, that I still would consider it because I mean, you only go to law school once, you want to go somewhere where
Right.
you're happy with. But it kind of just worked out that Gonzaga, they gave me the most scholarship money, and it was kind of like where I wanted to go to most, if that makes sense. And then I went to a visitation day in March, which I would definitely recommend to anybody who is able to go visit law schools. Definitely do that because it kind of changed my perception on a couple of them. Um, go do that because when I went to Gonzaga, I got to meet some of the professors. I got to sit in on a class. And it just kind of clicked. I could just see myself at that school. And so Gonzaga kind of just put a nice little bow on everything. They gave me the most money. It was close to home. I felt comfortable there. So yeah, it just kind of worked
Yeah.
out.
And I guess long term, because the thing I hear about, and for what it's worth, I'm fairly disconnected from the actual legal world and all that stuff. I'm, very admissions oriented, but I do hear that schools a little bit, well, actually pretty quickly, once you get out of like the very elite schools, it's very regional. Like I don't know how much that holds true, but I have heard if you go to school in Spokane, working in Florida might be tricky. Though it sounds like you're fairly tied to that Pacific Northwest region. Is that where you see yourself being long term?
I think so. I don't think I want to go back to where I grew up. I grew up in a town of 300 people in Oregon, and so
Okay.
there's not a lot there.
Right.
I do like the Spokane area. I kind of like the bigger city feel, not huge city, but bigger from where I grew up. So I could definitely see myself here in Spokane. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho is right across the river, and that's a beautiful place. And then Boise, Idaho, it's about 7 hours from here. And since there is only one law school in Idaho, a lot of times like Washington graduates will easily just go over to Idaho and work.
Oh, sure. Especially with you're like right there on the border. So I'm sure
Yeah.
you're tired.
Yeah. And so I did take that into consideration when I kind of decided on Gonzaga, like do I see myself being here? And I did. And so I feel like that's kind of like why it worked out. And Gonzaga isn't a super high ranked school, but it kind of worked for me because I do want to stay in the region. And they have pretty good employment rates within the Pacific Northwest and a pretty good reputation too with attorneys like
Right.
around here.
Yeah, and my take on like school ranking and all that stuff is like it really only matters at the very tippy top. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
Harvard is functionally different from Gonzaga, but is like the University of Washington that different? Like, I don't know. People see like there's a big rankings difference. I actually don't know where they're ranked. I would guess like Washington's like somewhere around 50. Gonzaga's probably somewhere around like 100. I have no clue. But the point is like I do this all day and I couldn't even like ballpark where they're at. So I don't know. It's just not that big a deal unless you like really want to go to those very elite schools. But like Washington or Seattle is not that either. Well, and I'm guessing Seattle's probably lower than Gonzaga. I don't know. But
I think Seattle's a little bit lower, but
yeah,
I don't know. The price of living in Seattle was also like I couldn't do that. So
sure. Yeah, it's a very different environment, but which like can be good. But you know, that's
Mhm.
most personal preference as well. Okay, cool. So as far as law school, do you guys take 4 classes? Is that the standard 1L? Like
Um, so we have five. But one of them is it's called Profound, and it's just like a class 1 day a week. And it kind of is just to work on like your professional skills.
okay,
Kind of teaches you how to be a law student. We kind of touch up on our resume and cover letters, do stuff like that. So it is another class, but it's a pass-fail class. And then we have 3 doctrinal courses, our first semester. So I took torts, I took criminal law, and then civil procedure, and then I took legal research and writing. Um, and so all of those ones were pretty very, very demanding, honestly.
right.
I think legal research and writing was the most demanding, which that kind of came as a
Oh,
surprise to
interesting.
me.
I would have like guessed the opposite. I would think that's like the easy one that you just kind of show up to
Yeah.
fresh.
Well, I think it's very professor, it depends on your professor. I have some girls in my class who they have different professors than me, and so their LRW class is very like kind of lax. And then
Okay.
my professor, she's great, but she kind of has that reputation of expecting a lot from you, and she puts you to work, but by the end of it you know how to write. And so I am glad that I have her, but it was a lot. And then my 3 doctrinal courses, again, mostly very reading heavy on your own.
Right.
And then we took a midterm for each of those classes and then our final. And then the midterms are really great. They kind of give you a gauge on how you're doing and kind of give you a taste for how the professor tests. Because every professor tests so differently, and law school exams are so different than like undergraduate
Right.
exams. Um, and so those midterms, they were anywhere between 15% of your grade to 30% of your grade. And so not a lot, like you still wanted to do well on them, but if you did good or bad, you still had to do good on the final and you'd be fine. So yeah, that was kind of how it was. And then next semester we have different classes except Profound, and then legal research and writing we take again next semester.
Okay, nice. Yeah, that profound. I'm assuming that is that professional foundation. Is that what it
Yeah,
short?
yeah.
That sounds like a really worthwhile thing because I mean you would hope that people are good at that sort of thing, like resumes, covers, letters, but as someone who does admissions, like you really see that people are not often as polished as you would hope. And also like just to, you know, check in on folks and make sure that they're doing it correctly. Well, that's awesome. So yeah, with that, those 4 classes and your little pass fail one, between class and studying, how many hours a week would you like guesstimate that you were spending on law school related work?
I would say at least 40, a lot of times over. Especially during finals week, like that's just kind of when you grind. I think like you want to learn the material all the way throughout, but then there's always stuff that you need to touch up on before finals and just get it polished. The nice thing about Gonzaga, and I don't know how other schools do it, but my LRW class, we were done with it. We turned in our final memo before we went on Thanksgiving break. So that was really nice. We got that big load out of the way before we had finals to focus on. So I was very grateful for that. Um, but yeah, I would say at least 40. And that's not what everyone does. I know there's a
Right.
lot of people who maybe do half of that and they probably are doing fine. But I've always kind of been like an overachiever and perfectionist. So I feel like
Right.
that's what I need to do. And I'm not working right now. I decided not to work my first semester. And so I'm able to put in that much time, you know? So I'm like, if I'm able to, then why not do it?
Sure.
Um, yeah, but it depends on the week. Like some weeks are a lot lighter, and then it really does feel like if you have like a lot of stuff to do in one class this week, you have a lot of stuff to do in every other class that week. So it kind of depends, but I really enjoy just kind of getting on a schedule. So I would usually get to the library at like 8 or 8:30, and then I would usually stay till like 6:30. And then and like when you're at school, you know, some of your time spent in class and then some of it's spent in the library. And then
Right.
you also want to work in time to go grab lunch or go grab a coffee or something like that. So you're not doing stuff constantly during those hours. But then that kind of allowed me when I went home, I kind of just had home time and I could unwind, maybe brief a couple cases for the next day. But everyone's different, I think is the main thing.
Yeah, and it's also not about like the hours you put in necessarily, because I don't know, some people's like 40 hours are much more efficient than others, and that can be
Yeah.
like if you're in the library but you're just like talking to people or like on your phone, like yeah, you're there, but it's not really doing anything. And yeah, as far as like some people doing 20 hours or less and doing fine, maybe. I mean, there are also 50% of people are below the 50th percentile, so some of them probably not doing great. But that's, you'll all know come January 5th. I think that's when you said you get your finals back. So that's got to be stressful. How did finals feel after taking them? Like, I guess it's kind of impossible to know, but did you feel good about what you submitted?
I did. I've always been somebody who I feel terrible about something when I turn it in, and then it always ends up being fine. Like
Okay.
when I took my LSAT, felt not good about it, but then I got a pretty good score. So it's really hard for me to gauge how I did. But once you submit your last final, you just feel like so free.
Yeah.
So and it was to the point where I felt like I studied all I could, and so it was kind of like I did all I could do. Like that's that. So I do feel good about them, but again, it's hard to know. And then you kind of just have to trust the curve, and I
Yeah.
don't know, it'll be okay. And the thing about Gonzaga too is they enacted something, I think it was kind of like during COVID, where you don't have to maintain a certain GPA to keep your scholarships. You just have to remain in good standing. And so that kind of has taken a lot of pressure off, I think, a lot of students to
Right.
be able to just kind of focus on learning and not have to stress so much
Yeah. If I
about,
don't get my 3.0, my financial
yeah,
future falls apart.
yeah. And
Yeah.
if
The
you don't
condition.
have a scholarship at Gonzaga, like I don't know how a lot of people would probably afford it.
Yeah. Well, what's unfortunate is the people that don't have the scholarship are probably the people that are doing the worst on the finals and stuff. Just like the way that the law school scholarship game works is the people coming in with the highest LSATs and GPAs, which, while not perfect, it is a predictive mechanism of who's going to be, a better student. If you got a 4.0 in undergrad, while it doesn't directly translate, it probably does indicate like better habits and certain things that will translate. Um, so those folks, like you guys, because you were overqualified for Gonzaga in my estimation, are attending for cheaper and you're likely to do well in the finals, whereas the folks that are paying $50,000 a year are the ones who are likely to also get the bad grades, which is unfortunate. It's just how the system's set up. But one of those sad things. Every year I see many people pay for law schools where their outcomes are likely not going to be good. And I just like want to grab them and shake them, but you can't, because when everyone else is congratulating them in the comments, you can't be like, this is the worst financial decision of your future.
Yeah.
I'm just like, you're a hater. I'm like, I'm really not. I mean, I don't comment that because like it doesn't do anything. I'm not actually changing anyone's mind, but like I want to. I want to be like, this is bad. Don't do that. But yeah, okay. Well, it sounds. Oh, so I talked to Mallory a couple weeks ago, and she's at Syracuse, but she said that her final was just like all typing. I think she said she was typing straight for like 3 hours. Is that fairly similar to what you had?
Again, very different for each class. All of our finals were 3 hours. My first one was criminal law, and that one you were just against the clock. Like all of us were just typing at like crazy speed, and then afterwards we all felt like we could have used like another hour just to type because it was so long. But we kind of also had to remind ourselves that law school exams, a lot of times they're not designed for you to hit every single point because that's
Right.
almost impossible for some exams. It's just to hit the bigger ones and like all you can. So that one we walked out of there and I just felt like exhausted because you just didn't have any time to like breathe in a way. Um, and then my second one I had was my torts one. And that one I felt like we weren't up against the clock quite as much. Like I used all the time that they gave us, but it was a lot kind of, I didn't feel as stressed out because there wasn't as much to type. And I think a big part of that was she had a lot more multiple choice in our criminal law one. So a lot of our time was spent on multiple choice instead of like typing essays.
Yeah.
And then the third one was civil procedure. That one was kind of in the middle. Like I definitely used all the time I had, but I didn't feel as rushed as my crim one. So I think again, it's just very professor specific, how they set up their exams, how many questions are on it. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, those 3 hours before I took my finals, I was like, oh, 3 hours is so long, but it goes by so fast.
Well, I'm
It
sure you
really
get into
does.
like you're like in the zone. You're just so focused on the task in front of you though. The time
Yeah.
is flying.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does sound like the constant though is like talking to Mallory, she said typing is a very important skill, and that if you're like not a good typer, it's going to really burn you because you just won't be able to get your ideas onto the page.
Yeah.
Um, so if any of you are not good at typing, go like I'm sure there's like free websites or something, but figure that
I
out.
think so. Yeah, there's gotta
That's going
be.
to be a problem. But yeah, okay. So at Gonzaga, how is the, I guess I'm trying to think about the way to phrase this, but like, how's the atmosphere? Are people relatively, do you guys have a lot of obnoxious gunners, or is it mostly people that are like pretty cooperative and helping each other?
So at Gonzaga, we have like three different sections. So we have section A, B, and C. And our 1L, the 1L class at Gonzaga this year, I think was one of the biggest classes they've had since like 2012 or something like that. But so those 170 kids or whatever were split into three sections, and you'll be with that section for all year. So I'm in section B, and I think in our section we have 67 kids. Um, and so I would say out of those 67, there's probably two or three gunners, and they've definitely gotten better throughout the semester. But it
Yeah.
was to the point like where me and my friends, we probably shouldn't have done this, but we would keep tallies on like how many times people raised their hand because it was insane. And I felt like sometimes they didn't even have anything to add, which
They're
is
just trying
fine.
to say
They're
something.
just raising their hand. And then, but I think a lot of people were all very similar and we're there to learn. And we know that the professor obviously knows more than we do. So I would say there is a few, but a lot of them are pretty cooperative and yeah. But I don't know. Those gunners kind of make it almost more fun because
Right.
they kind of just bring like more interesting ideas to the table. Like you some of them you never know what they're gonna say.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds fascinating. Every day you just show up and it's like, what's John gonna say today? He's gonna do something.
Yeah.
Um, but okay, yeah, and then I'm just curious. Obviously, I'm not asking you to like call anyone out, but do they tend to be? I'm assuming they're not like the 35-year-old in class. Are they more the like straight through undergrad kids, or is that a false assumption?
I would almost say the opposite.
Oh, interesting.
Um, yeah, we have a couple older, not older, but I would say like, I don't know, not right out of undergrad. And I think part of that is they have a lot more life experience, so they want to share those life experiences. Sometimes they don't just necessarily apply to what we're talking about, or they're way
Right.
off or whatever. Um, and at Gonzaga, there doesn't seem to be, I think like the youngest age, which I'm 22. I haven't met anybody else who's like younger than 22.
Right.
So there are some people who are right out of undergrad, but a lot of us took at least like 1 or 2 years off. But I would say the gunners are, at least in my section, are more the people not right out of undergrad.
That's funny. I would have thought the exact
Yeah.
opposite. Just because like I would think I don't know, it is a small sample size. You would think people in their 30s would be more, well, I don't know. When you say gunner, there's a large connotation of that. So because there's, I'm sure, a lot, like maybe there's people that are very engaged. There's also the kind of like socially unaware, why is this kid still talking? So there's like, I guess, a variety of that. And I remember back to undergrad, I was like in a 200 kid intro to poli sci class, and there was one kid who would talk every, it's like, dude, there's 200 of us. If we all talk, we're not gonna get through anything. Like just
No.
let the professor go through the slides. But yeah, that's fun. So you said you have friends. Has it been good socially in Gonzaga? Like, have you been able to meet people in your section or elsewhere?
Yeah, so I have two really close friends. We happened to meet at orientation. We had a 2 day orientation before classes started. One of them, I happened to just sit by at her table um during like the morning session. And then we just kind of had a lot in common. We got along really well. And then later in that same day, another gal, she joined us, and then since then, like us three have been like a trio attached at the hip. And that's been really helpful because they're both, they're both very intelligent, they're both very hardworking. And so we can kind of keep each other accountable and lean into each other when, I don't know, we're having a hard day or something. And then we can kind of
Sure.
bounce ideas off of each other. So I'm very grateful for those two. And then the more people like you meet and like the longer the semester goes on, you kind of just like meet more people and you're like, oh, you're really cool. I really like you. Um, like I joined a all girls law school intramural basketball team, and
Oh,
that was
fun.
so fun. That was like the funnest thing I did all semester. And so now all of us are really close, and then you kind of just meet people who are a lot like you and who you trust, and you just have a lot of fun together. And so the environment is really good. It definitely helps having really close friends. I think that going through law school alone or without close friends would just be very lonely, and I think it would make it even more hard. Um, and so that's a big thing. But I mean, the environment, like everyone's pretty friendly. There are definitely those people who are a little standoffish, but I think you're gonna find those people everywhere you go.
Right.
And then like leading up to finals, it was kind of like strange. You kind of just got the vibe that people were kind of like in their own little bubble. And I think part of it was maybe like they just kind of wanted to keep to themselves. They were stressed out. And so the environment can kind of change as the semester goes on. But um, for me, I was pretty lucky with making a lot of friends and friends who like you aren't just in law school with, like the friends that I made, we can go out and do something else that's totally unrelated to law school.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a big help too, because like there's going to be days in law school where you're tired or you don't understand something or you kind of just get like discouraged. Like maybe you had a bad cold call or something like that. And you kind of just need people to like lift you up and be like, you're fine, you got it. And also people who just know exactly what you're going through. Because if I were to go talk to, for example, my mom, like she's the sweetest person ever, but she'd just be
Yeah.
like, oh, you're so smart, you got it, which is great, but she doesn't know what law school's like. So having
Yeah.
people who know exactly what you're going through is a huge help.
And those two girls, are they around your age? Are they like
So
not that?
one of them, she is 24, so a couple years older than me, and then the other one, she's 27. And so she had been out of undergrad for several years. She was doing legal assisting stuff at a firm here in town. And then she kind of wanted to go to law school for a few years, but she just never did. I mean, she had a
Right.
good job. And then she kind of decided finally to go. So yeah, we're all in our 20s.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a good I mean, having a group like that, I have to imagine, just like you said, they understand what you're going through in a way that other people just can't. Or like even if people, I don't know, like if you emailed me, not that you would, but like let's say you did about like some law problem, I'd be like, good luck, I can't help you. Whereas, and I don't know, like I'm not really in the world, I'm in the admissions world, which is kind of a different, I don't know, get people through the door and then my job ends. Goodbye, good luck, figure it out. But which is fun. It's a good skill set, I guess, but it's different. So yeah, that's all fun and good. I'm trying to think what else I had. I had some other stuff. Oh, I guess the future of Chloe as a lawyer. Do you know what you want to do? Like, obviously it's pretty early, but post graduation or over your summers, do you have any idea for things you're looking at?
I have ideas. I'm pretty open to kind of whatever. I feel like I'm so passionate about so many things. I wish I could do it all. I think my biggest thing right now, what I want to do is family law. And whenever I tell people that, they're kind of like, "Oh, like really? Are you sure?" Because it is a very taxing and like demanding area of law, but I kind of grew up in the seeing the court as a child,
Right.
and seeing kind of how it affected my family and especially my mom as a single, like very low income mom. And so that's kind of where my heart is at right now. I especially want to help like single low income moms um, with like their legal issues. So that's where I'm kind of at right now. I've also thought a lot about being like a public defender. I had the opportunity my senior year of undergrad to intern for a public defender, and then another attorney within there. He did family law too, a lot of like divorces, custody, things like that. And so I like both of those. The main thing, I just want to work with people. I
Right.
think like, being a corporate lawyer, like a patent lawyer would be really cool. But right now I just want to work really closely with people. But it's also hard to say. Like I think, and that's where internships are so great, is you get a taste of it. And if you don't like it, then oh well, like you're in it for maybe 3 months and then you can go do something new. Um, and so yeah, I'm pretty open though, but I think right now I'm kind of focusing in on family law or being like a public defender.
Nice. Yeah, and that's why I think like a school like Gonzaga is so great because like you're totally qualified to do all of that coming out. I'm just looking at their law school transparency, which for those of you that don't know, it's a website that just breaks down basically outcomes out of each school. So it's a great way to really see what happened. Ooh, they don't have their job information. That's not good. But yeah, it looks like most people work at smaller regional firms. A decent chunk go into public service, and about 1 to 2 people a year get hired at Big Law, which is pretty crazy to hear that like 1 to 2 is about the average standard. So I don't know. Do you think you know who that 1 to 2 person might be, or
Uh, I'm trying to think. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. And honestly, I had a professor like tell the class when we first started that sometimes the people who are most vocal and seem the most confident are the ones who really don't know what's going on. I'm not saying that's always the case, but
right? It's
it's
like
just really
projection.
it's really hard to
Yeah.
know like how people are actually doing.
Oh, it's
Um,
impossible. You never
it's
know what their grades
impossible.
are,
Yeah.
the true understand. I mean, you could do none of the work, show up and just be loud in class, and it might look like you know what's going on, but you're like failing.
Yeah.
Or you could be on top of it and just be quiet. Like, I don't know. I was pretty quiet in undergrad. Not that I just didn't feel the need to hear myself talk. Like if the professor called on me, if it was like awkward, I'd talk, but I wouldn't like insert myself like, oh, everyone needs to hear my opinion. Cause like
Yeah.
don't, no one cares. But and just having that self-awareness, I think goes a long way. But yeah, it's interesting just because the only reason I mentioned that is I think people, if you go to Gonzaga eyes wide open about like working for like regional firms, public defender, DA maybe, it's a totally sufficient school. However, if you have like the dream of being like the next what's the guy from Suits? Like Harvey Specter, or I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. I just mention it a lot because all of you watch it. But yeah, it's not happening out of Gonzaga. Well, I mean, it could for like that 1 to 2 people. But I'm guessing there's more to 1 to 2 people where that's their postgraduate expectation, and that's a problem because like that's not going to be a thing. Well, I mean, it could, but for in all likelihood, it won't be a thing if you're playing the numbers. So yeah, I guess family law and public defender. It looks like you're gonna do good in the world, which is always nice. It's good to hear that. But also good in a way that's real. Occasionally you hear someone talking about like space law, and I'm like, I don't know if that's a thing, but that there
We'll
is
go
a
off.
yeah, US News ranks the top 10 space law programs. I'm like, I don't know. It's like, can you point to some space law cases? I don't know that this has been much of
Yeah,
a
I don't even like,
area.
yeah, I don't even think I've really like heard much about space law.
Well, I don't think it's a thing. I think it's just like marketing
Oh,
admissions program.
okay.
Um, like I'm looking. Okay, yeah. Space. Oh, you get an LLM in space law? What? I don't know. I'm pretty out on like there's what is it? An MLS, which is a master's in legal study, which I don't know. It just seems like you're totally unqualified to do anything post graduation with that. But maybe I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
I know a gal who went to do that and now she's in law school and like that master's in
Yeah,
legal studies didn't really do anything.
it's just really expensive way to spend a year,
Yeah,
which is a bummer because like you don't have to. You could just sit at home. You could work at Subway for a year. You'll
yeah,
probably be better off in the long term.
yeah,
Um, But I think people, especially at our age, I mean, I'm a little older than you, but like still like early slash mid 20, I'm 24. But I think people they feel as if like maybe they're not in like graduate school or like getting ahead on things. And they're like so worried because other people are doing stuff. They like rush into something, and it's like it's okay to just take a year and figure things out. It's not,
yeah.
and in
No,
fact, it's
totally.
better than like rushing in and getting into like
Yeah,
some plan that's not going to work out.
yeah. Because like adding on to that, I didn't want to take a gap year.
Right.
And then I didn't get like the LSAT score I wanted. And so I'm like, okay, I should just take a year to study. And looking back on that, taking a gap year was like the best thing I did because I allowed myself some time to make sure law school is what I really wanted to do. I gave myself time to work and like actually make money and be a person, not just a student for the first time in my life. Um, and so yeah, that would be definitely a big like recommendation for anyone considering law school, like especially out of undergrad. I know people who have done it, but a lot of people take gap years and like that's okay to do.
Oh, it's so normal. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm always telling people to take gap years, and people hate to hear it because I think everyone's on this like timeline that they've set for themselves, which is
Yeah.
totally official. It's not real. It's just something that they have in their head. Um, because I think the idea, especially if you've been in school your whole life, the idea of taking a year and doing nothing sounds like so foreign and weird. But I've never talked to anyone they're like, I'm so mad I took a gap year. Everyone's always happy they
Oh,
did it and didn't
yeah.
rush. Other quick things with I am curious about extracurriculars slash other stuff. You said you did the basketball team. Are most of the extracurriculars like law review and moot court? Is that like for 2Ls and 3Ls, or do you guys get involved with that?
So they introduced it to us a little bit. They had like members of like moot court and law review come into like our profound class and talk about it. So we got a little bit of a taste of what it's like so we can start thinking about if that's something we want to do. But they kind of recommend we keep our extracurriculars down a little bit our first year because your first year is supposedly the hardest. Like you're learning how to be a law student and absorbing so much knowledge. Um and but so they're kind of like things to think about your second year. Gonzaga has a lot of really great clubs though. And so I'm a part of a few. I think one of my favorites is it's called street law. I think there's some other law schools who do it too. But you're on a team of like 4 or 5. Like my 3 really good friends are on a team with me. And then we have a gal, she's a 2L who's on our team. And so every 2 weeks we go into a local high school and we teach a lesson on like constitutional law that's kind of applicable to high school students.
Oh, cool.
So we've done some on like free speech, like search and seizures and stuff like that. And that's a lot of fun. It kind of gets you out in the community. It counts towards like our 30 hours of like community service that we have to graduate. So that's been a really fun one to do. And the workload really isn't that bad. You just prepare the lesson, kind of like distribute parts of it, go through it a few times, and then go to the schools. And the kids really love it. And it's really fun to connect with high school students. And they seem really interested in it.
Right.
And then we're pretty lucky. The teacher of the students who we teach, he went to Gonzaga Law. He did private practice for a few years. And then he just didn't really like he didn't really love it. And so then he went and got his teaching certificate and now he's a teacher and he loves that.
Sure.
Um, so that's one of my favorites. I'm in one called the Women's Law Caucus, and that's really cool. I'm in Criminal Law Society, and in the spring we're gonna do like a jail tour, like a prison tour. And so I would definitely recommend clubs to 1Ls. It's very pretty low time commitment, but it kind of gets you building connections and meeting like upperclassmen too. And then maybe like your 2L or your 3L year, you can kind of run for offices of stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I did the intramural basketball team. That was really fun. Um, I know some of the guys in my class, they have like a football team they're doing. And so you can kind of like make your own things. I know there's also a run club. And so there's a lot offered, and it's good to get kind of involved in that. And I think a big thing that I've found with joining clubs and like intramurals is meeting like older, like 2Ls or 3Ls, because they can kind of bring a lot of insight to law school, and they know what being a 1L is like. And so they can tell you, you're going to be fine. Like everybody feels like this. Um, and so that's really helpful to have older law students too, to kind of help mentor you. So extracurriculars are great. I'm very glad that I've done them, but it's also important not to get yourself like too invested in them, because
Right.
like your studies come first.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it does help with like you said, the criminal law society without knowing anything about it. I mean, if you know 2Ls and 3Ls and then they graduate and then go like work at like the DA's office or some like criminal defense firm, having those connections, I'm sure goes a long way in terms of figuring out what you do post grad. Because then you can like, I don't know, reach out to them, talk to them, see like, hey, what's going on? Because I'm guessing a lot of the people that get underemployed are folks that don't really put themselves out there and don't know anyone, because then they graduate and they're just like, where do I even go? Because if you're shooting
Yeah.
out resumes on Indeed, you're probably like kind of done so. Um, at least everyone I know who like applies for jobs by just like spamming out resumes on LinkedIn and Indeed, it just doesn't go well. 'Cause I think you're like you're one application among like 500. Where whenever I
Yeah.
applied for jobs, it's been a long time, but I would just go to I would like try to find a place I wanted to work, and then I would just like email the person in charge, because like then you're the only person and you're not competing with anyone, which is so much easier when you have no
Yeah.
comp. And well, that's it sounds like you have a lot of extracurriculars. That's more than I would have expected for the average person. Um, are you able to like manage all that pretty well and have it take a backseat to school?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not like I like, for example, I'm not in run club. Like I just threw that one out there because I know that was a pretty popular one. Um, but I'm in, yeah, like the street law one. That one's pretty manageable because again, that's only every other week. And then
Okay.
we don't do it like during finals week. And so that's really helpful too. And some clubs are a lot more involved than other clubs too. Like they're not all doing something every single week. Some of them are like once a month or one big event every semester. Um, but yeah, it is pretty manageable. The meetings are always during the lunch hour, like 12 to 1, and nobody has classes during that time. So you never have to like fork out extra time for the meetings. And then usually activities will be like Friday afternoons or something like that. And so yeah, time commitment is pretty easy. And then the thing about like clubs is if you don't want to go to an event as a 1L, you don't have to.
Right.
And so just kind of like keeping yourself in check with that and being like, okay, do I have time to do this, or do I have the energy to do this? And if you don't, then it's okay, you don't have to go. And then like even basketball, we had games on Sundays, and then we would maybe do a practice like once or twice a week, depending on what everyone's schedule allowed. But it's so like the clubs are so low key, and you just kind of have to remember they're there for fun, to kind of just get your mind off of like law school for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean
Nice.
like the run club, for example, like the run club, uh a couple of my friends were in it for a while, but then it seemed like it always turned into just like only talking about law school. So then they kind of quit going, because to a point you kind of just want to go somewhere where you don't feel like a law student, because that's, I mean, all you are for so many hours of the week. Um, so just finding things to do that make you feel like a normal person and can like get your mind off of school. Those are really important too. Like that's kind of what basketball was for me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, having those, I guess, you don't want to be law school for 40 hours and then the 20 hours you're
No.
socialized. Not that you'd socialize for 20 hours, but either way, you don't want to then just be talking about law school all day eventually.
Yeah.
And I don't have a ton more. I do have one question because I was a poli sci major. It was one of my majors back in undergrad, and I used to have this amusing phenomenon. I would watch the Bernie kids debate the Turning Point, which is like a right wing thing, and they would just go at it at each other. Is there any of that in law school? I know there's the Federalist Society, but is there any like left wing equivalent? And do those kids like spar in class, or is it more professional than the undergrad goofballs?
Um, it kind of depends on like what we're talking about, and how I think a big part is how like law professors approach stuff too.
Sure.
Um, like my criminal law professor, and I feel like a lot can go on in like the criminal law class. He actually used to teach at Georgetown. Really, really cool guy. Um, like for example, during like our homicide unit, like he wouldn't cold call at all for that. And so it would mainly be like him lecturing, and then if anybody had anything to say, like they could raise their hand. But so that was
Yeah.
really cool how he did that. For like the sexual crime unit, he did it where he would just like post a recording and then we could watch it on our own. And so I feel like in those like really sensitive topics,
People are
the
pretty well
professors,
behaved, or
wait,
the
what was that?
people are well behaved, or the professor just
Yeah,
keeps
people
it
are well
fun.
behaved. Like there was like in torts, I think we were going over like the attractive nuisance doctrine, which is regarding like trespassing children. And there was a lot of debate on that, on whether, you know, like kids should know better on not to go somewhere, or if landowners should actually like owe them a higher duty. So there was actually quite a bit of debate on that now that I'm thinking of it. And I mean, like some of the arguments, I'm just like, okay, that one's maybe okay, but then some arguments, I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't even know how you got there. But everyone is their own person, whatever. So there is here and there, but a lot of times like professors, they don't have time for that kind of stuff. So they're like, okay, we're moving on.
Right.
Like
I mean,
we
they
don't
don't
need
want their
to go
class
over.
to get hijacked by like an argument over like is taxation like
Yeah,
constitutional. Like, that's like where it would go down. But
yeah.
I just would think that in law school, I mean, you're touching a lot of it's probably boring and old, but some of it I think is relevant to like what's going on in terms of politics, and people have their strongly held opinions. So I just remember always having that in like my undergrad poli sci courses, and all it would take is like one or two kids on each side of the political spectrum that felt like like this class was debate class. It's like, guys, you're totally fine to have your opinion, but like no one else cares.
I know. Yeah.
Which like I always thought it was funny because it's like I enjoyed watching them go at each other. I remember one, it was in a Western philosophy class that I took as like a sophomore, and it was about, we were reading Marx, and one kid, he was talking about like how communism was terrible, and he's like, oh yeah, the Chinese killed like 300 million people under their communist regime, which isn't true. It was like 100 million. And then the like Bernie kids were like jumping on him for that because they're like, oh, he's exaggerating how bad communism is. It's like, guys, like your argument is also bad because like it's still
Yeah.
100 million people. And just watching them because they were both dumb. And it's like one of those things where it's just like they're just both so out of it and talking about how I don't know. I just always found it amusing, but also definitely a waste of time. Like in hindsight, did I gain anything from that other than like a little bit of amusement? Probably not. But it's good that it sounds like most people are. I mean, you would think people are more mature and grown in the average law class than the average poli sci class. Um,
You'd hope so.
yeah, you would hope so. Although I have to imagine there's probably a moment or two throughout the semester. I won't ask you to like name anything, but you know, you have goofballs that say goofball things. So sure that's out there.
Ow.
Okay, yeah, I guess other than that, what courses are you taking in the spring? Do you have your schedule all set up?
Yeah, so we'll have like legal research and writing again, propound again, and then I'll have constitutional law, property, and contracts. So those three like doctrinal classes, those are tough ones. It's what everybody says. But I don't know. You kind of just have to do it, you know, at that point. You kind of just develop that mentality of like, okay, I have to do this, so I'm gonna get through it. So those are my classes for next semester. Um, they should be good. I mean, I don't really know anything about those three topics,
Right.
so it'll be a lot of learning, but I think a lot of people are in the same boat. And from what I've heard, the professors we have are really good, and so I'm sure it'll be okay.
Yeah, it's I mean it's one of those things where you just don't know until you get in. Like hearing property or contracts. I don't know. Maybe it's just like arrogance, like having not gone, and I'm sure it is, having not gone through. I'm like, contracts, that's gotta be easy. The words say what they mean. And that's it. And I don't know. That's like I think probably I'm good at the LSAT and probably would not. Well, I don't know. I think I would be a good lawyer, but also I think I wouldn't. I don't know. I have a lot of like I think takes that wouldn't go well in the legal profession. Like I think precedent is the dumbest thing ever. Something like which I don't know. Maybe I just don't understand the arguments for it. It's totally possible. But like if precedent was a thing, wouldn't we still like have Plessy v. Ferguson? Like I don't know. There's
I
like
know. I know.
that.
Yeah, we actually like taught about precedent in a straight law class, and like kids were asking that. They were like, "Well, how come like this doesn't necessarily like matter, but this does?" So, I don't know. I
Yeah, I
think
mean the
it's a
only way to use
question
it
we'll never have an answer to.
you have to apply it selectively or else we get to like really bad outcomes. Like otherwise we would like still have slavery and stuff because that was precedent. And I get that you can apply it selectively and like evolve it, but to me that just seems inconsistent at that point. It's like why even have the concept? Which like I don't know. I don't know much about the Supreme Court, and I'm probably gonna trigger a lot of people by saying this, but I do have to say that I think Clarence Thomas is like my favorite just because he says precedent is dumb. I don't like it. I'm like, that's my dude. I don't know about the rest of it. I hear there's some correction stuff. I don't know if that has merit to it because I don't follow politics or anything like that stuff. I think it's bad for your mental health. And also you can't do anything about it. But from what I understand, I'm just like, he's making a good point with that. Precedent is dumb.
Yeah, he has a lot of good like dissenting opinions too. So he knows what
Yeah,
he's talking about.
well, that's the other thing that you hear with I mean, I'm not super into it, but you hear people like really criticize the Supreme Court. It's like pretty sure these 9 folks are pretty smart, regardless of like whether or not you disagree with them. They're not just like pulling things out of a hat. I hear a lot about like how the Supreme Court is like bought like politically. I'm like, I think you can disagree with them and have like very strong disagreements on like their, I guess, philosophy, but I don't think they're just making shit up because like someone told them to. But
Yeah, no,
I don't know.
I don't think so. But
Maybe I'm the clueless one that doesn't get it, but I don't think so. I think the people that just assume that anyone that disagrees with them must be bought, you're probably the clueless one. Because people can legitimately disagree on things, and that's okay. But yeah, I don't know. The Supreme Court does strike me as a weird institution, though. The fact that it's just like when they die is like who gets to be on it, which I don't know.
I know.
But that's our system. We have a lot of silly things that we just like locked in, and then it's like that's how it is now. We're going with it, which like, I guess points to us for consistency, which is fun. Yeah, are there any, I'd say, like unique Washington law things that you've learned having gone to school there, or is it? Because I know like Louisiana has like wacky laws. I'm not sure. I don't know anything beyond it's wacky, but are there any things you've learned about Washington in particular?
Not really. No, not really, honestly. I mean, in bigger like legal cases, like Washington kind of follows the majority of everything else too, which kind of makes it like easy to learn. But I haven't really like found anything like any weird laws, but I'll have to do that. That would be interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting seeing the ones like on the books from like the 1800s.
I know there's some crazy ones.
My favorite one is so I was born in Tucson, Arizona, and there's a law that I think women can't wear pants. And it's still on the books, it's just not enforced because like they haven't like repealed it. But it's like you're still theoretically not allowed to wear pants if you're a woman. They could like write you a ticket, which I'm sure that would immediately be struck down if it like went up to
That's so
process.
weird.
But like there's stuff like that that's just still on the books because no one's bothered to I guess change and like why bother to change if no one's enforcing it? But yeah, I guess we'll wrap things up pretty quick. I want to let you get off to whatever you have to do over your break. I guess do you have any advice you would give to anyone currently going through the application process, or even if they're done with the applications, but they're preparing to enter law school, do you have any advice for them?
I think if you're going through the application process, the best thing that I would like give you, sorry, as advice is to kind of just trust the process and enjoy it. Looking back on it, I wish I kind of would have just taken things a little bit slower and enjoyed where I was at because like where you're at right now in the application process, like this is probably where you wanted to be like 1 or 2 years ago. And so just allowing yourself to be in the moment and appreciate all the hard work you've done and like all the good that you're going to do and believe that like it's all going to pay off, it's going to be okay. Um and for example, like maybe if you had like a bad LSAT score, like oh well, you don't even have to tell anyone about that if you don't want to. I know for me, I always felt a lot of pressure from my parents, and so that was really hard for me. But you just have to trust that like it doesn't really matter what anybody else says. I know that's such a cliche thing to say, but like this is your journey, this is your path, like this is your thing that you're doing and you're going to be fine. And so yeah, just let yourself trust the process, like it's going to work out. Get a good tutor. I think that was the thing that I didn't do my first time around with the LSAT, and then I got my score back and it wasn't great. And then at that point I was like, okay, I need someone to help me. And then that's when I contacted Ben. And then everything else from there got so much easier. And it's okay to ask for help and not have to do it yourself because the LSAT is really hard and it's supposed to be hard. And then like if you're getting acceptances and whatnot, like also appreciate that. And you're gonna look back on it and be like, that was so cool. You know, like even now as a 1L, I look back to my LSAT experience and it was really hard, but I'm glad I went through it. So yeah, just believe in yourself, trust the process. It really doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. Even your parents who have probably kind of maybe like told you what to do forever. Like you don't have to
Right.
listen to them right now at this point. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, so I
parental
would just
advice can
say,
be the
yeah,
worst with law school admissions because so often it's like you have to go this year. You've studied for the LSAT for 6 months. Why are you not attending? And it's just like
yeah,
it's a $200,000 decision if you rush it. Which I don't know.
exactly.
Are you ever going to earn $200,000 a year in your life? Most people won't. I mean, some of you probably will, but like take the year, get a higher LSAT. It's so worth it. And then in hindsight, then you don't have this like giant worry about like what would have been had I done this the right way because you just did.
Exactly.
You don't have. I'm sure you won't have what ifs 10 years from now because you did it correctly. You didn't like screw anything up. And yeah, just going off that. One part of me, or I felt like I heard something about the LSAT in there. I'm assuming no one mentions the LSAT in law school, right? Like it's just flash and behind you, or is there any conversation about it?
Um, there was a couple people, and like they're kind of just one of those ones who I think will always just go back and forth on stuff. They were talking about their scholarships that they got, and this one gal got a like significantly higher scholarship than this other person, but her LSAT score was lower. And so like there is talk about that, but like once you're in law school, like
Yeah, it's
it
behind
doesn't
you.
really matter. Like it's behind you, you did it. Like we're all here, we're all kind of like once like on your first day of law school, like you're all starting at the same point in a way. Like no one's better than anyone else at that point. So yeah, it like it's gonna be done and over with at some point. And like when I was studying for the LSAT, it became like my whole life. And then now I'm like, I never have to think about it again. And
Right. Yeah. So
so
it's still
just
behind
like
you.
knowing that it's gonna be fine and like someday you're never gonna have to worry about it is like honestly freeing.
Yeah, and I think like while the LSAT is not amazing, there are good things about it. Like I think the biggest thing it really tests is like, are you an organized person that can do a hard task? It's less so about the actual material. Although I do think some of the material matters. Like, I mean, looking back at the reading comp passages, obviously the answers are tricky, but the actual like subject matter is fairly interesting, I think, about from most
Mhm.
of the passages, whereas like people will like tell me how much they hate like this 18 sentence passage. I'm like, have you seen like the law books that law students read? It's only going to get worse. Or I posted, and I don't know if you follow me still on Instagram. I think most people purge the account once they're done, which makes sense because like why would
No,
you?
I still follow you.
Oh, you do? Yeah,
Yeah.
people stick with it, but I posted like 2 weeks ago, like law school is harder than the LSAT, which I thought was uncontroversial. I thought like everyone knew that, and I got so many people saying no, it's not. I'm like, are you sure? Like, have you been to law school and are you just some goofball who's taking the LSAT and expects it to get I mean, I guess real quick, would you say that law school is harder than the LSAT as an overall rule?
Overall, yeah. I think like one reason why the LSAT was so hard and maybe why it's so hard for so many people is like I didn't have the option to only study for the LSAT when I was studying. Like
Right.
I the first time I was doing it, I was also going to school full time. I was working almost 30 hours a week. And then I was having to study for the LSAT and that's where it got hard. But I think like if you were only studying for the LSAT itself, it would be not that bad. So yeah, LSAT is, or I mean, law school is harder than the LSAT, but they're different.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it gets harder after the
Well, I guess
LSAT.
the
Like I hate
subject
to tell
matter is really
everyone
hard.
that.
Like even if you get like a 94% in terms of like just looking at percentage scores on the LSAT, that's like not that good in terms of a scaled score. I think it's like a 160 something. So you really need to like crush the LSAT to get like those really high scores. And maybe that's where people think it's hard. But I was just thinking more in terms of like time invested. Like if you really want to crush the LSAT, I'd say like maybe 2 to 3 hours a day. You can do more, but I find most people have trouble sticking with like their mental sharpness. Whereas I guess if you showed up at 8:30 a.m. and you left by noon every day for law school, you're just not going to be doing hot. It's just going to go downhill so fast. So yeah, it's one of those things where I think there are fair critiques. Logic games is going away, which not to go back to not to like traumatize you too much with the visit back to the LTAP, but were you good at the games? I feel like you did pretty well. Or
Yeah, and I feel like once I started working with you, that's where I got way better at them with like strategizing. And one thing that I'm really bad about is sometimes I make things harder than they really are. And
sure,
then
yeah, the
you
LSAT
really
really
helped be
punishes
like,
that.
don't overcomplicate this. Like it like just work through it. And so I got a lot better at the logic games, and I think I got a lot of points there. Um, correct me if I'm wrong, are they just adding in another logical reasoning
Yeah, so it's
section?
gonna be two LR sections and one reading comp.
Okay.
LSAC says that supposedly scores are gonna stay the same, which is probably true on average. Like I think the like average 155 will still be a 155. What I'm curious about is how are people gonna score 175 to 180s? Because even as someone who like is really good at the LSAT, like I often don't score below like 175 if I take a practice test now. Not that I often do, but it just doesn't happen. Uh where I miss questions. I never miss questions in games. I can still miss a reading comp or an LR because like I get tripped up on something. So I do think at the very top, the scores are going to come down despite LSAC not expecting. I mean, maybe they'll be more forgiving in terms of how many questions you can miss. Um, but yeah, I think it's going to suck. Like I found
Yeah.
logic games to be like the mental break during the test where it's like, okay, this is different. I'm not reading. I'm just kind of like doing puzzles for 35 minutes. But
Right. And like every once in a while you get some like crazy game, but the thing with like logic games is a lot of times they're like the same game, just like shifted around a little bit from like a practice test, if that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, I mean, if you're putting five variables in order, it's well, like the variables are different and the rules are different, the skills are all the same. And even on those weird, like really weird games, like there's one where you have to put people in a circle, which is hard to set.
Oh, I remember those.
And there's another, well, I'm trying to think which one. Well, there's the buildings game. People really struggle on that. But often these like really hard ones, if you just figure out there's like one thing that if you see in your diagram, it just like answers the question. Like there's the dinosaur game, which is
I
notoriously
was just
difficult.
gonna say that.
And there's one inference where I think if you figure out that one of the dinosaurs has to be a certain color, it just like breaks the game and you do the whole game in like 5 minutes. And it goes from like
Yeah.
being the hardest game of all time to being relatively straightforward. And it just comes down to having a good diagram. So I don't know. It's one of those things where people were kind of dancing on the grave of logic games. And I think it's just people that have only taken a diagnostic and really haven't studied that much. Because like, yeah, game sucks when you sit down with it, but you get good at it so fast if you're at least like I don't know. I'm not sure where you were scoring logic games wise, but pretty well. But like to get to perfection on games versus perfection on LR, it's just such a easier mountain to climb, and that's why I think scores are going to go
And I
down. But
mean,
we'll see.
I did pretty well on LR too, but
Yeah,
I mean, like having two of those would be a lot, and then reading comp would be a lot. Like both, or yeah, I
well, if
always
you're,
had
it's worse than that. You
somehow
have a four.
somehow on
There's
the LSAT, I always had two reading comp sections, which
yeah,
obviously one of them was experimental, but like you're done reading, like you don't want to read anymore. But
yeah. Well, and that's where it also hurts. You don't get that mental break of like I just don't
yeah,
have to read. Because now it's going to be. I mean, it's going to be two LRs, one reading comp, and then you're still going to have the experimental, which is either going to be another LR or another reading comp. I don't
oh,
even know which is better at that point because it sounds terrible either way.
it does.
But like I'm good at the LSAT. I think that even I would have. I don't know about fatigue. That's probably not the right way to put it, but like you're not as mentally sharp on section four as you are in section one, regardless of how good you are. Things do just deteriorate because at that point you've been sitting there for 2.5 hours. You've had to deal with the proctor getting you in if you're taking it online. I think in person, everyone wants to take it in person. I don't get it. I think taking it online is easier. But either way, the point is that you've gone through your day, whether that's going through the proctor or commuting to the test site. You're 2.5 hours in, and you have another section to do, and it's more reading. Like I don't know. To me, that just sounds horrible. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe scores will go up. I really doubt it, but that is what everyone seems to be. I keep posting about it because it's engaging well on Instagram. Partly because people like in the comments and they start yelling at me like, "No, games is really hard. It's going to get easier," which is good for the algorithm. So they are fueling me when they argue with me. But it's I don't know. Maybe I'm part of the problem with like social media, but it does well. So blame the system. Um, but yeah, fun stuff there. Well, I guess I will let you go. Do you have any final thoughts to wrap things up, or do you feel like you covered your law school experience fairly well?
Um, I think I've covered it pretty well so far. I think going to law school is definitely unlike any other thing that you will ever do, and everyone always tells us that. And then another thing that like I want to say is like take care of your mental health, like whether that's when you're studying for the LSAT or when you're in law school, like it's so important. And so you just kind of have to know when to let yourself have a break. And like with the LSAT, that's so important because you don't want to get burned out. I think towards the end of my studying, I was kind of just getting burnt out and to the point where I was like, I want to be done. I'm so over this. And so yeah, just kind of like listen to your body, listen to your brain, because if you're just making yourself work while you're burnt out, it's not going to get better. And like your scores are going to drop. And then also, like, don't freak out if your scores are dropping a little bit. Cause I remember I had a couple where like my scores weren't doing very good before I took it. And I remember like emailing you, Ben, and being
Yeah,
like,
I
Ben, I'm
remember that
freaking out.
email.
Like, why is this happening? And I was just burnt out. So like, don't be afraid to maybe just give yourself a little bit more time off, or instead of studying for like 3 hours a day, maybe just do like one, and that's better than nothing. So
Yeah, and I
yeah,
mean, if you're doing an hour of good work, you get a lot done.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny. People really do freak out about scores dropping, whereas it's part of just natural variance. Some days you're gonna get your 50-50s right, other days you're not. I've also been doing a lot of question type stuff, which I really discourage, but people want it, and like you got to give the market what it wants. Of like doing weekend questions in a row. But because of that, I've been categorizing all the different question types. And some tests have like 5 parallel questions, and the next will have like one. So like I didn't notice that just doing them because I don't really do sections that much. But going through and writing it all out, I was like, well, they really like mix it up a lot test to test. So if you just like a parallel questions, you get that test. Might be bad news for you, and that can immediately drop your
And it
score.
is scary. It's
Yeah,
scary because like you have no idea what you're gonna get. But like I said, like also once you take it, just try not to think about it because you don't know how you
yeah,
did. And so it's not worth like stressing out about. So yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, good luck in the rest of law school.